So, here I am once again to take a look at the anime Goblin Slayer, and talk about another interesting recurring theme found within the show. I'm just gonna warn everybody now, this topic I am about to cover can be anxiety-inducing to plenty of people. So, prepare yourself for that, I guess. But hey, just because a topic is hard to talk about, doesn't mean it isn't worth talking about. Okay, so how should I start this video off? I guess I'll just go straight into talking about death. Specifically in this video, I want to talk about how this show explores the anxieties surrounding death, and really the general uncertainties of the future. Yeah, this is probably not going to be the cheeriest of videos. Do I even really need to explain why death is so anxiety-inducing? I mean, it's the end. Sure, there might be something afterwards, but even then, our lives as we've known them are most certainly over. Now, in general, Goblin Slayer is not the kind of show that shies away from death. Quite a few people die in this show. After all, this show is all about adventurers whose jobs require them to fight monsters. It's a very dangerous business, and the show wants to make sure the viewers know this. This much is made clear by the first episode. I mean, what is it, like a minute into the first episode when Priestess is first signing up to be an adventurer and they hand her, like, these dog tags? You know, the, things they give soldiers to help identify those who can't identify themselves, aka the dead and severely wounded. Priestess even confirms that it's very common for overconfident new adventurers to have very short careers. I've praised before how this show doesn't shy away from killing. It adds some tension and makes the action more exciting. There are risks and consequences. And when our heroes do make it out of a hairy situation okay, it feels all the more special because of this. And there are indeed some close calls for our heroes.
Fight them off!
There is one particular instance I want to bring attention to here, and that would be, of course, Goblin Slayer's first bout with the Goblin Champion of Watertown, which goes something like this. This is like the closest he comes to actually kicking the bucket in the series. Like, he survives, obviously, but it is a grim reminder for both the audience and also the characters themselves. Now I'm gonna start to get into the aspect I really wanted to talk about in this video. Not just how the threat of death affects the viewers, but also how it weighs on the characters themselves. At first, it seems like almost dying doesn't really affect Goblin Slayer that much. It's just business as usual. But of course, Goblin Slayer is also not the most expressive or talkative person, especially about his feelings. See, I think this near-death experience did affect him in a deeper way. This show is just very subtle about it. It doesn't beat it over the audience's head and outright say that's why he's acting the way he is. So, after Goblin Slayer's near-death experience, there's a couple of peculiar moments he has. First, he has that discussion with Priestess about his deeper fears and anxieties while they share some ice cream. Being more open about his emotions with someone than we've ever seen in the show thus far. Then, on the carriage ride taking them back from Watertown, Goblin Slayer has a very interesting moment where he tells Priestess he wants to make something when they get back. Her first guess is obviously it's something for slaying goblins, but then he reveals that he wants to try making some ice cream. This is a significant moment for him as it's the first time he's trying to suggest a non-goblin slaying activity. So, after his near-death experience, the stubborn, single-minded, and isolationist Goblin Slayer suddenly starts opening up to his friends more and trying new things. I think that it really is that almost dying was the wake-up call he needed to realize he needed to make some changes in his life. We only have so much time, and has he truly spent his the best he could? The very next episode, episode 10, supports this idea as well. It opens up with him still on the same cart headed home. At the moment, he's not really interacting with anyone. Rather, he's just sitting there thinking to himself. We hear his thoughts as he mulls over his past, saying how, as a kid, he wanted to be a very different kind of adventurer from the one he turned out to be. If only he could just let go of his sister he lost to the goblins. It's like he's starting to question his life choices. He's been obsessing about goblins for 10 years, unwilling to budge on his seemingly never-ending goal of killing them. He's allowed his obsession to consume his life, and it's obviously held him back in a lot of ways. And it sounds like he may be starting to regret that. Now, of course, one thing we can't forget is that a person's death does not necessarily just affect that one person. It can also have an impact on the lives of those around them. And this is the segue to a character I really wanted to highlight in this video. This is Cowgirl. She is the childhood friend of Goblin Slayer, and the only other survivor of their original hometown. At least that we know of. Lucky for her, she happened to be out of town visiting her uncle on that fateful day when the goblins attacked. Her parents, however, were not so lucky. And God, I know it's tragic, but I do really love this shot. Sorry. Anyway, now, while very tragic, her loss from that event doesn't seem to have affected her quite as harshly as it did Goblin Slayer. Probably, because unlike him, she wasn't there to watch it happen. That's not to say it didn't affect her at all, but this tragedy didn't completely consume her life as it did with him. After losing her parents, Cowgirl started living permanently with her uncle on his farm. The same farm that Goblin Slayer would also come to call home eventually. Though unlike her, he has to pay rent. To be fair, she does actually seem to help her uncle run the farm, so... And yes, this is the reason why she's called Cowgirl. Something notable about Cowgirl is that she, without a doubt, has the most intimate relationship with Goblin Slayer out of any of the other characters in the series. And right off the bat, too. I mean, it takes a while for him to develop a good relationship with the others. They live together, they eat together, they go out on errands together. He cares about her, and she cares about him. However, there are, of course, struggles that come with loving someone who works in such a dangerous field. To me, it's a very interesting element of the show to see both of them have to deal with his own mortality. Many times we're shown that when Goblin Slayer is out goblin slaying, Cowgirl will just sit outside anxiously waiting for his return.
All I could do was wonder what he was doing, and if he would return.
You're going to have a hard time tomorrow if you stay up too late.
I know, just a little while longer, and then I'll head to bed.
This is very understandable to me. Again, goblin slaying can be really dangerous and risky, but it is still his job, and it's important work that needs to be done. I think the most fitting comparison for this kind of situation is someone who has a relationship with, like, a soldier or a police officer. However, I do think that anxiousness of not being sure that you're gonna see your loved one again is something a lot more common than one would think. I certainly feel like I've been in her place before. So yeah, here's where I'm gonna try to get a bit personal. Now, I wouldn't say my examples are anything too flashy or extreme, but hey, that's kind of the point I want to make. So, like, my dad worked in a plant for as long as I can remember. For the longest time, I never thought of this as a particularly dangerous job, but this changed one day when there was an explosion at his work that left one of my dad's co-workers with burns all over his body. That was pretty shocking, but even then, I was like, Okay, but what are the odds something like that would happen to my dad? Well, sometime later, one day my dad came home with a sling on his arm because apparently part of a machine had broken off or something like that and hit him. Seeing my dad, this big tough guy I looked up to, hurt like that, well, that rattled me a bit, and that's when it really hit me. I don't think I've even told anyone this before, but for a long while afterwards, whenever my mom got a phone call, I had this little sense of dread in me, thinking, oh man, is this gonna be the call? If you know what I mean. I don't know, all that stuff really freaked me out as a kid, especially since I was a kid, because what could I do if something happened? More recently, my girlfriend was in a car accident on her way to work. Like this crazy 18-car pileup. Don't worry, she's came out of it relatively fine, just feeling a bit sore. But of course, she still has to go to work, and for a long while afterwards, I would get this growing sense of dread whenever it came around the time she got out of work. So yeah, I think I can relate at least some to what Cowgirl must be feeling. Not being able to go out and keep an eye on the people you care about all the time. That feeling of helplessness because you can't do something to make sure they're safe. You have to let them do their jobs and live their lives after all. Life can be unpredictable sometimes, and that can be scary. Also, I do know there are plenty of people who have it worse than me. I hope I'm not coming across like too whiny or something. At least I did get to see them at the end of every day, and for some people, they have to endure long periods where they can't see the ones they love. And of course, there are the cases where they don't come back. I just thought it'd be best to take the time to talk about some personal examples and show that this kind of situation can be a lot more common. And I mean, especially after the year of 2020, I think plenty of people can relate to worrying about your loved ones and feeling powerless to protect them. But yeah, this really made Cowgirl a very relatable and sympathetic character to me. So now, let me get to talking about some other events from the anime. Overall, episode 10 is a very interesting one to me, and it's definitely the episode that most heavily touches upon these particular themes. It's a much slower episode. I mean, it's even titled Dozing. What I mean is, there's no adventuring, and there's not a lot of action, but I don't necessarily consider that a negative. It's one of those where we see Goblin Slayer on one of his days off, which is already an aspect I enjoy. Seeing what these characters do in their free time in between adventures really makes it feel more real to me. They can't always be going on adventures all the time, and it gives us a chance to see a different side to these characters. At about midway into this episode, Goblin Slayer meets up with a lot of his friends. They're just having a good time, eating, drinking, sharing the latest news. It's a really nice and sweet scene altogether. Then Guild Girl brings up the topic of the Adventurers Guild possibly opening up a new training hall. This facility's primary purpose would be to instruct newbie adventurers and better prepare them for the field. But it would also serve as a way to give jobs to older adventurers. After all, adventuring is very physically taxing and dangerous at the same time. Death isn't the only thing they have to worry about. If an adventurer gets too old or suffers some kind of crippling injury, that's it for them. They can't go on adventures anymore. They can't make a living. It's like those sad stories you hear of when an athlete suffers an accident or just gets to a certain age and they're just kind of tossed aside. This training hall, though, could provide those adventurers with another option, passing on their knowledge to the next generation of adventurers. Guild Girl says this one particular line.
Besides, an adventurer doesn't stop living just because they don't go on quests anymore. I think the arrangement would benefit everyone.
An adventurer doesn't stop living just because they don't go on quest anymore. This line really seems to have an impact on Cowgirl, but I'll get a bit more into that later. Guild Girl also jokingly points out that Goblin Slayer needs to be more careful, so he has the option to retire one day. She warns him that if he continues to be reckless, she'll ban him from adventuring for a 6-month period, which gets an approving nod from both Cowgirl and Priestess. His response to this is, that would be bad. Which honestly, I do think says a lot. Goblin Slayer has been known to employ some rather risky tactics before. It seems as long as goblins get killed, he's willing to take on whatever risk need be, no matter how excessive it is. Even here, he doesn't actually acknowledge Guild Girl's point. He just says that would be bad. So in order for him to give more priority to his own safety, Guild Girl basically needs to threaten to take away his ability to go slay goblins altogether. Yeah, this scene really establishes his priorities. For the rest of the episode, we start to see some odd behavior from Cowgirl. What Guild Girl said really seemed to bug her, but she seems very uncomfortable or even afraid of the idea of actually talking about it with someone. Even when Goblin Slayer himself tries to bring up the issue, she cuts him off and pushes it off.
The future?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
For what?
Never mind. Forget I said anything.
I gotta say, I really do love this scene. I just can really feel the unease. Goblin Slayer seems to be really worried about her, but also doesn't want to push the issue, and he already isn't very good with this kind of stuff to begin with. And it probably isn't good for her to bottle all of this stuff up. But I find it really hard to blame her for wanting to push off the issue. Honestly, I think she's afraid that if they talk about his future, she's gonna hear an answer from him that she might not like. It's one thing to think about it, but once he says it aloud, well, that makes it real. We do finally get the chance to hear her thoughts toward the end of the episode. She gives this inner monologue starting with the question, what does his future look like? She replays Guild Girl's words in her head. See, one of the most terrifying thoughts for Cowgirl is that death for Goblin Slayer isn't just a possibility, but rather, it's an inevitability. She knows she can't stop him. His obsession with killing goblins is just too strong. It isn't just a job for him. The way he is, he'd probably never give it up. Even if he gets too old or too injured, I'm not sure that would stop him from trying. If he continues on the path he's on now, he'll keep going out to slay goblins until the day he just doesn't come back. She continues on. People grow old. They get injured. At some point, they slow down. Eventually, everyone reaches their limit. Even if he doesn't die, there will come a day when he can't slay goblins anymore. She then says, as nice as they are, these days can only last so long. She asks herself, what will he do then? And what will he be able to do? This whole speech, of course, touches upon a hard truth to swallow about death and old age. It is inevitable. That's probably one of the scariest things about it. You can never truly escape it. We can keep it at bay, but not forever. And really, what can she do to help him? Just asking him to stop is probably not going to be enough. In another video, I talk about how I see Priestess as the primary catalyst for Goblin Slayer's character arc over the show. This is still true. She really is the one that helps him make some changes in his life and begin opening himself up to others. Now, while Cowgirl definitely wants to help him, there's a few advantages Priestess has over Cowgirl that allowed her to do this better. First off, Priestess is an adventurer, and Cowgirl isn't. While Cowgirl may get to spend a lot of time with him at home, that's just at home. She can't follow him out on quest. She doesn't have any combat experience or magic powers. Priestess is able to be right beside him when he's out and about in the world. Also, Priestess is just a natural mediator. She's very good with people. Meanwhile, this doesn't appear to be one of Cowgirl's strengths. Maybe this is something I'm just seeing when it's not really there, but it seems like when she has to interact with others, she can come across as a little bit awkward. She is much better in social situations than Goblin Slayer, but to be fair, he sets a pretty low bar. In the movie, she explains how she's had trouble making friends because she lives so deep in the country on that farm. And just like that, she became an even more relatable character to me. Anyway, it may sound like I'm just listing her weaknesses, but all of this is not meant to say that Cowgirl doesn't play an integral part in his character arc. In fact, I think it's all the more meaningful because it's in spite of these things working against her. Priestess is the one that helped him along his journey, but Cowgirl is actually the one that provides the final push he needs. Now, let's talk about one of my favorite scenes with Cowgirl. At the very end of episode 10, Goblin Slayer is on one of his normal patrols around the farm. Except, this time, he actually finds something. He finds dozens of goblin tracks. The episode ends here, but it picks right back up in episode 11. Cowgirl is cooking inside the house when Goblin Slayer walks in. She starts talking about breakfast, and he just responds with,
Run.
Obviously confused, she asks if it's some kind of joke. He tells her about what he found. She's like, alright, goblins, no big deal, you can just fight them off, right? He says he can't, explaining that he's not used to fighting outside of a cave. Also, based on the number of tracks, he deduces that this horde is in the hundreds and must be led by a goblin lord. An attack is coming soon, but if she leaves now, she can still get away. After a pause, she tells him that she's staying, because she knows that's what he's going to do too. Goblin Slayer doesn't know what to say, and I love her response to his reaction. He goes on to explain that death is not the worst thing that's going to happen to her. Really trying to scare her to leave. She already knows this, though. Now, she's not just doing this for the farm or the principal or whatever. She's doing this for him. As she said, she had already realized that Goblin Slayer was going to stay no matter what. He's Goblin Slayer, after all. He's going to slay goblins even when the odds are completely against him. She knows he doesn't care enough about his own life to let that stop him, but if she's in danger, that's another thing. She's doing this because she knows by putting her life at stake too, it's going to force him to take extra measures. Measures he wouldn't normally resort to. Why? Well, because he cares about her too. He goes to the guild hall and does something drastic. He gets in front of everyone there and does something we haven't really seen him do before. He proceeds to ask them for their help. Now, I talk about this scene more thoroughly in one of my other videos, but I would at least like to highlight this one moment when he's asked what he's willing to put up as a reward for assisting him to kill the goblin army, and he says, everything. This includes all his belongings, his equipment, his assets, his knowledge, his time. Then he's asked if he's willing to give up even his life. Goblin Slayer, after mulling over it for a second, says how taking his life would hurt someone important to him, thus his life is not within his discretion to give. Goblin Slayer may seem cold and unemotional most of the time, but he really does care about her. And it's those feelings for her that push him to make that final big step in his character arc. The fear of losing her is the thing that pushed him over the edge. Again, there aren't a lot of ways she could help him. This is the one of few ways she could. She stood her ground in spite of all the risk. And, honestly, Cowgirl earned a lot of respect from me in this scene. So, let's cut to the final episode. Very appropriately titled The Fate of a Particular Adventurer. After all the Goblin Lord stuff gets taken care of and everyone heads back to the guild hall to celebrate, Cowgirl comes over to Goblin Slayer and they have one last conversation together before the season ends. Goblin Slayer then finally tells her what's been on his mind, and I don't think it's what Cowgirl was afraid he was going to say.
I think I can see myself getting out more as an adventurer. See some new places.
I like that idea.
So it looks like Goblin Slayer actually might finally be opening himself up to other opportunities other than just goblin slaying. A choice that will hopefully help him live a life without regrets. A choice that might give him a little bit more time to spend with the people he cares about. Cowgirl, of course, smiles and encourages him. And you know what? I think that's a good enough note to end on. Yeah, I think I'm about ready to wrap up. Now, what can we get out of all this? Well, let's see. How about this? Life can be unpredictable. The one thing about it that is that it comes to an end. Could be sooner, could be later, but it will come. And that's just something we have to learn to deal with, each in our own way. And I mean, you can't stop living your life or stop other people from living theirs just because you're afraid of it. It's natural to be uneasy about this kind of stuff, so don't be afraid to talk about it with those around you. And keep in mind that your death can also impact those around you, so that should give you extra reason not to be so reckless with it. And finally, you only get one life, so try to live it without regrets. Don't be afraid to try new things and explore different opportunities, and probably most importantly, appreciate the time you have with the ones you love while you can. Once again, thank you all out there for listening.
The Goblin Slayer swung his blade fierce, wretchedness he now would purify. Goblin corpses he cut through as the heads flew high. Oh, courageous warrior, with a sword that's tempered in perfect silver, never will the blade betray its purpose or its way.